The Ghoul is one of the most divisive killer releases Behavior has ever done. On one hand, we have the most fun killer in a long while, with so many players praising Kaneki as the reason they came back to DBD. But on the other hand, we have survivors who are already saying this killer needs various nerfs, and that he is one of the most unfun characters to go against. Are these complaints true? Is Kaneki overtuned? Or is this just the classic of calling for nerfs on the day of release? In my personal opinion, after playing and facing Kaneki, it's a mix of both. The Ghoul has various clear problems with its kit that need to be changed. However, at the same time, I still hold the opinion that Kaneki is very well designed, and the only reason so many survivors have problems with him is because of a skill issue. With these changes that I am going to propose, I genuinely see Kaneki as an A tier, potentially high B tier killer. But currently, without any debate, Kaneki is very close to an S tier character for the majority of the player base. And if we can learn something from Skull Merchant and Chucky, is that killers that are very hated by the community and too easy to play might suffer the risk of being nerfed to feel worse. So let's talk about Kaneki and what makes him so strong. And one of the reasons is his absolute insane map mobility. Kaneki has the best map traversal power in the entire game, beating any teleporting killer and even beating the Blight, since the power is much easier to use and it's not that bad on indoor maps. You naturally slide with this killer, which prevents Kaneki from being stuck on random collisions like Hillbilly or Blight can. The only killer who can beat this level of mobility is the Nurse, but only in vertical situations. The mobility is why so many players, including myself, love Kaneki. It feels fast and dynamic, like you are Spider-Man crossing the entire map in one swing. The sliding becoming base kit from the PTB is also a great touch, as sliding feels much better than just losing all the momentum, and it allows this killer to slide in front of survivors in order to block their vaults or catch up to them fast. This part of the kit should be completely unchanged, as any changes have the risk of making him clunkier to use, and thus it would kill the reason why so many players are finding Kaneki so fun. The first problem that Kaneki has is the insanely free first hit he gets, which is miles better than any other killer in the game. If you ever see someone comparing Kaneki to Legion, to put it simply, they have no idea what they're talking about, as their first hits are in no way comparable at all. First of all, in order for the Legion to hit you, they have to reach you first. This means that for the most part, Legion has to walk around the map normally instead of using their power for mobility, because if they do, they run the risk of having it on cooldown by the time they find a survivor. The second thing is that survivors can hold W and pre-run in order to avoid getting hit by Legion, so they have to catch up to the survivors first. And finally, some survivors can actually counterplay Legion by pallet stunning them, which makes them lose a lot of time. Kaneki, on the other hand, does not have to manage his power at all, as you can travel around the map faster than Legion could ever wish for, and at the same time, you can hit survivors with it. But that's not all, because even with the insanely fast map mobility Kaneki has, he also does not have to catch up to a survivor, because the moment the survivor is anywhere near the Ghoul, you can instantly lock onto them with a hitscan attack that is basically impossible to miss and that forces survivors to stand still. And Kaneki will instantly dash to that survivor while that survivor cannot move. There is no counter to Kaneki's first hit and no way to delay it, because no matter if there is a pallet, a vault or a small structure, as long as Kaneki sees you and clicks in your direction, you are getting hit no matter what. I actually think that because of finesse and dramaturgy being so popular, having a killer that completely counters it so easily is the reason why so many players find him to be overpowered, as they either have to change their loadout or play with 2 perks less. The worst feeling part about this free hit is that Kaneki can hit you through walls and even some floors, as some hits that can be done by this killer are absolutely ridiculous. The reason why this power feels so absurd is because it is coded in a completely different way compared to the other projectile killers, as his power is Hitscan instead of it being a projectile, so it works in a very similar way to the Singularity's Biopods and teleporting power. Hitscan means that the moment the player clicks on the action button, the game will register the hit, which means there is no travel time whatsoever, so there is no way to dodge it as a survivor. But on top of that, and on top of the forgiving hitbox which is gigantic, the devs also programmed a buffer system, which you can see in this footage. If you aim at something that is possible to be grappled to, like an obstacle, and you aim towards something else, the game will still keep the first spot as an available place to grapple, so that means that even if you miss in your screen, the game will still pull you towards the last correct position the game allowed you to. This was programmed in order to make this killer much easier and forgiving to use, and it indeed feels very dynamic, but this also results in the killer being able to hit through walls, because even though a survivor has already hit themselves from me, since I aimed at them earlier, the game still detects their location as correct. You can see this perfectly here. The Shiva has already broken line of sight with me, but the game still shows the mouth icon on the last spot that she was visible at because of the buffer system. The huge problem with this is that the devs have already went on record saying that this system is here to stay, because they have tested the power as a skill shot, and according to them, it felt very bad, it made Kaneki much harder to play, and it also made him much harder to use on console, which is where the majority of casuals are. So because of that, there is a very small chance we are getting any changes to this system, as the devs will cater towards the casual player base, and having the killer be easier to use just makes Kaneki more accessible, which is necessary for a licensed character since many new fans have joined DBD because of him. The other problem with auto-aim, besides making Kaneki feel brain dead to use, is that auto-aim can actually impact negatively in the match. It is way better to not hit injured survivors with your power, as you will enter the drinking animation if you do, wasting your time and giving them distance for free, especially if you first hit them with a basic attack. So that means, just like Nemesis, you have to hit survivors 3 times. The optimal play is to leap in the environment and cancel while sliding in order to hit the survivors with a basic attack and down them. But in order to do so, because of the survivors' hitbox being so massive, you have to hit in the sky or aim very far away from them in order to do so, and it feels completely counterintuitive. The auto-aim, in this case, plays against our favor. If the devs want to keep the auto-aim mechanic and the insane hitbox of survivors, then it makes no sense whatsoever how this power has an absurdly insane range when compared to other projectile killers. With Huntress, you have to charge your hatchet and take distance into equation. With Trickster, you have to hit various shots at the same time. With Slinger, you have to calculate your distance with a maximum range of 18 meters. All of these characters have to take travel time into account, but with Kaneki, you have to point and click on the direction the survivor is, and you will dash the entire length of a main building. This is absolutely overtuned, and that needs to be changed in order to make it more skillful for the killer player. Something that I find very odd about Kaneki that nobody seems to be talking about is how long his window for using the second leap is. For some reason, you can just hold it for a long while until you get a hit on the survivor, and this is personally the worst part about his kit as a survivor. With Blight or Nurse, you have to use your power fast before it enters cooldown, which forces the killer to make quick decisions while in chase. Houndmaster can hold her dog redirect for a while too, but you are completely static while doing so, giving survivors distance if you miss. Dracula's Wolf Pounce will automatically pounce twice when you use your power. And then we have Kaneki, who can just hold his Kagune leap and move quite fast in order to get a pixel of the gigantic hitbox survivors have. The closest killer that we have with this is Wesker with the Egg add-on, as he can also hold his power for a long while, but that's where the similarities end. Wesker walks at 2.76 meters per second when he holds his Virulent Bound, whereas Kaneki can walk at 3.68 meters per second, almost 1 entire meter more and with a more forgiving hitbox. Not only that, Whisker also makes a clear sound when he enters this mode and when he cancels it, as you can see his hand going down and the Ouroboros disappearing with a loud sound. But with Kaneki, since he has his Kagune out all of the time, you have to look at the animation of Kaneki himself in order to see if he is going to leap. And also, the cancel sound is extremely quiet and blends in with the tentacle sounds of the Kagune themselves. And many times while in a chase, I was unable to hear if Kaneki cancelled his power or not, which would have been extremely useful. Check this gameplay and tell me if you are able to hear Kaneki cancelling his power, because I personally cannot, even while editing. A very loud complaint I have seen a lot in the community, and one that I absolutely agree with, is how bad it feels to get hit by Kaneki because of the design choice of holding the survivors when they are hit by the attack. Not only are survivors meant to just accept that they have to play with one health state against this killer, they also have to endure a weird animation where they are stuck without being able to move for some time. This removes the agency of the players and forces them to see an animation that is honestly very janky, and something I thought was only part of the PTB and was unfinished. The animation does not feel smooth at all. Whisker, Houndmaster and Deathslinger also remove the agency of the players, but there is a logical reason why they do, and they at least allow survivors the ability to do something. With Whisker, you move with the killer in a really cool cinematic that shows impact. With Deathslinger, your camera is forced to see the killer while some intense sounds play, and it also allows you to wiggle in order to try and break the chain from the rifle. And with Houndmaster, the dog will push you back, but you can still interact with pallets in order to stun him. Let me remind you also that all of these killers have to aim and hit their attacks, so it doesn't feel cheap. With Kaneki, you are stuck in place, which can burn your exhaustion perk completely, and you have to watch this animation of Kaneki play. It's funny how one of the most dynamic killers behavior has ever released also feels the most sluggish for the other side. So already, Kaneki is leagues above Legion in terms of power, as his first hit is significantly easier to get and they have insane mobility on top of it. And for some reason, just like Legion, Kaneki is also able to apply deep wounds, and this is where I think many of the survivor complaints come from, because this status effect completely counters Dead Heart, as well as completely makes styptic agents and syringes useless while in a chase. And since these items are so popular, it obviously makes survivors feel extremely weak, as they cannot use their overpowered stuff during a match, so survivors cannot rely on those crutch items in order to artificially extend their chase. Previously, the only killers that could apply deep wounds consistently with their power were Legion, which is basically an M1 killer and very weak, or Whisker if he got a collateral with the Virulent Bound, and the Knight if he got a hit with an assassin on a survivor, both of which are very niche situations. With Deathslinger and Houndmaster, deep wounds are basically irrelevant, as their power can inherently counter a styptic or Dead Heart even if they didn't have deep wounds. All of those killers have to trade something in order to get this effect, or their deep wounds are situational. But with Kaneki, every single chase will have deep wounds, and that's on top of the fact that his mobility is insane and he actually has a decent anti-loop power, and that's the insane volt speed he gets when enraged. The reason why nobody complained or talked about this mechanic back in the PTB is because it originally didn't work that way, and for some reason in the live release, Behavior decided to buff the Pallet Vault speed when using your power to 1.5 seconds for pallets. This allows Kaneki to completely bypass some pallets that for other killers are must breaks. Now you might argue that Whisker can also do this and the Vault power is barely used, but Whisker's Vault is significantly worse than Kaneki's. Whisker's Pallet Vault is 1.5 seconds with a long cooldown afterwards that slows him down, whereas with Kaneki's power, you can vault the pallets even faster as long as he is enraged, and with barely any distance loss, as his cooldown is much faster than Whisker's because there is a 0.6 multiplier put on it, so the vault is 1 second only. On top of that, This is something I didn't know until I checked the wiki, but when you get hit with the tentacles and the killer vaults, you get hindered for some seconds, and this allows Kaneki to get hits that other killers like Legion or Wesker would not be able to do for completely free. Kaneki's power allows him to bypass god pallets and some windows, and he can completely invalidate some loops with his vault power, which is why I disagree with the players that call him an M1 killer after he gets the first hit, because this is simply not true. Not only is his Pallet Vault 0.5 seconds faster than Wesker, he also slows survivors down, giving them even less distance. Now, I understand that the Enraged mode is supposed to buff Kaneki just like the Overclock mode of Singularity does, but the way to get Enraged is so easy and the timer on it is so much, even after the nerf to life, that Kaneki will constantly have this mode active all the times. This means he gets access to this fast Pallet Vault speed for absolutely free in every single chase. If Enraged mode were something harder to achieve, then I would understand keeping this vault speed as is. But let's be real, I think I am only not enraged at the start of the match and in the endgame when the survivors play stealthy. So we have the killer with the best mobility in the entire game, who also has the easiest first hit in the entire game, who also can apply deep wounds to the survivors, and who also can vault pallets and windows, rendering a lot of them useless. It's pretty clear to see that this killer is indeed overtuned, and I wonder why the devs felt that the vault speed was necessary. The only way to balance a killer with such an easy first hit is to make it so that his chase is easier for survivors, like is the case with Legion being an M1 killer, or Plague being an M1 killer and having access to a time limited power which can also be dodged, and that comes with a hard counter if she gets stunned. As a massive fan of this killer, the Pallet Vault feels very similar to Chucky's camper power, however it is not as brain dead. It is true that as a survivor you can try and predict this and not just throw the pallet, so I do like the gameplay aspect of it, but I also want the best for both sides, and this Pallet Vault speed clearly makes Kaneki not an M1 killer as many of the players claim he is, and this feature was not in the PTB and I still loved Kaneki, so it was completely unnecessary. The thing I personally hate from Kaneki on both sides is how inconsistent his power is, as it has a lot of bugs that I hoped would be fixed from the PTB. Sometimes, when Kaneki hits you but there is an obstacle in between, the power will cancel and you won't injure the survivor or play the drinking animation. However, because the devs programmed this system as Hitscan, since the game detected that you hit the survivor indeed, the game will play the sound effect of the enraged Kagune. Sometimes the survivors will have the Kagune infection without deep wounds and you will get the enraged status effect, and other times the survivors will simply escape with no consequences. The worst example I can show you happened in the same match. When I hit this Kate with my tentacles, the power got cancelled and I didn't get the enraged effect, despite me visually seeing her. However, later in the match, I hit a Sable that was through 2 walls, and the game still gave me the enraged effect. And that's not the only inconsistency in his power. In some cases, you will hit the survivor with the tentacles, but your power will be cancelled, so nothing happens. Other times, you will hit a survivor through an obstacle or a wall, and the game will register that as a hit, despite it clearly not being one. And the worst part for me personally is when there is a pallet or a vault in between. Sometimes, the game will register the hit correctly and will put the survivors on deep wounds, but other times, you will instead vault the pallet or window as your power gets cancelled. Let me put you 2 situations side by side just so you understand how bad this mechanic is. In the first example, I put down the pallet and Kaneki grapples towards me, and since I don't have deep wounds, I get hit. However, in this other example, I vault the pallet while injured because I assume the Rize will put me in deep wounds, but she vaults the pallet instead, which I was completely unprepared for. That's not even talking about the amount of glitches I encountered with this killer and so many that I've seen on Reddit. I am not going to compare Kaneki with the absolute mess that Houndmaster still is, but there were some crazy bugs still with his kit, like survivors moving while being hit, the Kagunes being revealed with aura reading perks even after the effect ends, powers being cancelled for no reason, and vaults sometimes not working. These glitches exist, but I am not going to count them when talking about balance. Now, despite all of this, I did state earlier that Kaneki is not S tier, and I stand by it. Everyone who says he is S tier has not played against good survivors, because unlike with killers like Nurse or Blight, you can actually loop a Kaneki for a long while, and I played a lot of survivor matches in order to prove it. The counter to Kaneki is to break line of sight as long as the killer is not enraged and only has 2 leaps. Be a good looper in short loops and fillers that connect to each other, be comfortable with looping while injured, and sadly, adapt without using perks that are extremely popular like Dramaturgy and Finesse. If you know how to play in certain tiles, Kaneki has to play like an M1 killer, so meanwhile the other survivors can pump out the gens and there is nothing he can do besides playing a tile normally until the pallet is broken. The best tiles I found are the smaller ones without any god pallets, and especially maps where there are various loops close together, like in Autohaven, Cold Wind, Eyrie of Crows, or Garden of Joy. If Kaneki doesn't have Bamboozle, you can also vault strong windows, as that's where I felt the killer to be much weaker than I expected. I feel like in a lot of those situations, it's not because of Kaneki's power, but rather because of Bamboozle allowing me to get that hit. The amount of times I was downed because of his power is actually really small, and the majority of times were simply by normal outplays that any other killer could do to me. The thing that makes Kaneki so strong is once again the fact that his insane mobility will force survivors to always be in chase with 0 downtime, and the fact that he takes out a lot of things of the game that many survivors depend on, like Dramaturgy, Finesse, Dead Hard, Styptic Agents, pre-dropping, and holding W. When you know how to loop, you can also afford the luxury of not wasting time healing and instead pumping generators. The hardest matches I have played were against teams that didn't heal. Healing under the hook is especially bad, because just like Blight and Nurse or any teleporting killer, Kaneki can come back to the hook and injure both survivors easily, removing off the record endurance effect. If you mend, that is enough most of the time, since you will force the killer to hit you again with their power, as the auto aim is gigantic. Body blocking is also really strong against him as far as I noticed, but it has to be done in hallways and not in open grounds. I get that having a killer that counters various perks is bad, but this is something that has always existed in the game. Like Legion and Slinger, Pyramid Head can completely counter hook perks, and Plague demolishes any healing build. The problem with Kaneki is just that he is the first to be extremely popular, combined with the fact that he is in a new meta where Dramaturgy and Finesse exist, not the design of this killer being bad. I genuinely believe that Twins, for example, have less of a counter than Kaneki does. What I fear from the devs is that they over-nerf him because of all this negativity, because when you are good as a survivor, the Ghoul is clearly not an S tier killer, and I don't want them to do extreme nerfs like increasing his cooldown, making him slower when cancelling the power, or nerfing the slight power, because it could make Kaneki into a C tier killer easily. I am very confident that with time, more survivors will see that this killer is in no way as lethal as the Nurse, the Twins, or even Chucky. With all of this out of the way, here are some changes that I think would make him much better to play against, while still keeping him fun to play as. Number 1. Reduce the range of the auto-aim attack. The devs have already said that the aim mechanics of this killer are here to stay, so the only logical fix I can find to how busted his power feels like is to reduce the range of the leap attack when going after survivors specifically. What I mean by this is that I would make a range for environmental objects and keep it the same as it currently is, and then make another range which is half of the environmental one, and that range is exclusive for survivors. That way, you can still travel around the map exactly the same, but if you want to hit survivors, you first have to leap closer to them and then hit them with a shorter distance. Not only would this make Kaneki feel much more fair to play against, it will also bring a new counterplay for survivors, as this way they can try and put various obstacles in between them and force Kaneki to use one of the leaps in order to position himself for the attack. It would also fix a lot of the instances where the power is cancelled because of a weird collision on the way. This would also increase the skill ceiling and skill floor of Kaneki, and in my opinion it is needed, as currently Kaneki is just way too easy to play for the insane reward he gets. And let me tell you a secret, by making it so that Kaneki has to grab around the environment instead of the survivors, it prevents bad players from accidentally hitting an injured survivor, so that actually makes Kaneki stronger when you know what you're doing. But don't tell survivors I said that, this is for sure a nerf. Number 2. Don't hold survivors still at any point. As you could see in that one bugged instance of the power, there is a way for the devs to prevent survivors from being stuck once they get hit by Kaneki, and I think it should be that way by default. Do not stop survivors at any point in the chase, and instead make the animation so that it looks like Kaneki stabbed them with the Kagune and is now drinking from it, instead of holding them in place and then stabbing them with the Kagune. It would feel much better for survivors, and they might get more distance this way, but Kaneki is the only killer who can afford this distance, since you can literally close it afterwards. This would also make it possible for survivors to use perks like Sprint Burst, Lithe or Overcome in order to get more distance against him, as currently those perks get wasted while in the animation. You can see that sometimes, when using the power to vault a window, survivors can still keep moving, so I don't know why this is sometimes applied and other times they are stuck. Again, this change would make survivors much better to play, but it would basically change nothing from the killer side, since his power is designed to catch up to survivors. The best of both worlds. Number 3. Reduce the window in between leaps. Since Kaneki is a dynamic killer, he should work just like the other two fast-paced killers do. Drastically reduce the window in between leaps so that it forces Kaneki to make quick choices with his power, similar to Blight and Nurse. It makes no gameplay sense as to why Kaneki can hold his power for so long, and also why this is something that the game designers thought was important, since there is an add-on that adds 3 seconds to it on top, which in my opinion should be reworked completely. With a shorter window in between loops, this rewards smart survivor players that position themselves behind cover in order to actually dodge the killer and force Kaneki to enter cooldown. As it currently is, doing this is basically impossible with the speed at which Kaneki moves during this window, but I don't think nerfing the movement is something smart, as it would make him feel much worse when traveling around the map, so instead, reducing the time in between leaps is the best option. Number 4. Increase the sound of the power cancel. I am sure that I am not the only player with this problem. Imagine players that are hard of hearing having to hear that quiet noise that Kaneki makes while cancelling his power. This was actually the very first complaint I made while playing against him, as I thought the cancel noise only played on the killer end, but the reality was that it was just way too quiet. Increasing it for survivors would allow them to take other choices, and it would also make it more clear to know when Kaneki can attack them with a basic attack or when he is going to do a leap, which currently is not as clear. For how loud Kaneki is in the lobby, I am surprised at how he doesn't moan or scream when cancelling his power. And finally, number 5, reduce Pallet Vaults. And this is, I am sure, the hottest take in this video and what will make killer mains hate me. Wesker's Pallet Leap is 1.5 seconds, and I see no reason why Kaneki has to be faster when he already gets an insanely easy hit and insane mobility. The price you should pay for this is to work for the down, instead of playing Vault Simulator. The Kaneki I fell in love with was a version without this power, and it felt amazing using the power to slide next to a survivor to down them, so nerfing this as soon as possible will make Kaneki more fair, and force players to either play the loops like an M1 killer or use their brain in order to cut survivors off. Now, there is a reason I specified pallets only, because I think the window vault is fine as is. It's just that since pallets are considered limited resources for survivors, it should make sense that pallets are safer for them compared to a window. I know suggesting changes 2 days after the release of the killer might seem too much, but I firmly believe that these changes would make Kaneki better to play against, while at the same time not changing any of the parts of the power that we love and play him for. As someone who has been constantly playing this character non-stop, these are the only changes I would be happy with. Anything done to the cooldown, to the speed while leaping, or to anything in between would make him a Chucky 2.0, where his pick rate and kill rate would decrease by a lot. Let me know if you agree or disagree with this video. Thank you for watching and have a nice day.